Welcome back, everyone, to the 2021 Alaska SAF Annual Meeting. And I am unmuted, right? Good. My name is Ed Morgan, in case you forgot since yesterday. I'm the chair of the Alaska SAF, and I am a member of the Juneau chapter. A little recap on yesterday. We were honored to hear from our SAF president, Gene Kodama, who I see again today. He opened the meeting with some background on how he came to be a forester, and he wrapped up his talk with a pledge to lead the SAF towards much needed increased membership. We also had Sheila Spores from the Forest Service describe the transition from old growth to young growth management on the Tongass National Forest. And what I thought was an incredible effort to inventory those stands to the tune of 14,500 plots to determine stand attributes. We were also fortunate to have Tessa Axelson speaking, the executive director of the Alaska Forest Association. And she provided a status report on the timber industry in Alaska, and particularly in Southeast Alaska, with challenges and outlooks for the future. Today, we are again honored, this time, to have our CEO, Terry Baker. Terry, I see you just joined us. Thanks for being here all the way from Washington, D.C. And Terry's going to say a few words before we have our speaker. So let's give Terry a warm Alaska welcome, a warm Alaska virtual welcome. That was it. It's kind of quiet.
All right. Well, thanks, Ed. Thanks, everyone. Really excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Want a chance to just share a few things, and Ed, I'll keep it kind of short to see if there's any particular questions folks want to ask me before we move into the full program. Just wanted to touch base on a few things that we've been working on as an organization from the headquarters and with the staff. Obviously, it's been quite the interesting year for all of us, both 2020 and coming into 2021. But we've been really busy in a lot of different ways. Probably one of the most important ones is where I'm sitting right now. So I'm sitting in our new headquarters office. And so really excited about that as we come together and pulled in the different parts and pieces to really connect our space in downtown DC to the mansion that we had there in Bethesda. And so looking forward to sharing that with everyone. Actually, today we were doing some video work. So we're actually looking at how we might pull that together into something we share with all of our members, just a virtual tour of the new space. So that's a fun and exciting piece for us. In addition to that, we've been actually feels like more busy during the pandemic than pre-pandemic. And a lot of that has to do with working with various partners and stakeholder organizations, in particular related to policy and advocacy. Myself, I meet with several of the National Association executives on a regular basis, oftentimes looking at where we have overlap and have an opportunity to support each other on various policy issues. So obviously, the Trillion Tree Initiative, there have been discussions, the current administration has put out language around their 30 by 30 initiative, lots of initiatives out there with the new administration. So having a great group of folks that represent the broad span of the profession is great to just engage in those conversations, be it the National Association of State Foresters, the National Woodland Owner Association, American Forest Foundation, just to name a few, but there's about 10 of us, and Association of Consultant Foresters. We get together basically monthly to really kind of talk through some of these issues. And actually prior to the pandemic, it was more so once or twice a year that we would meet in person together. So there is a little bit of a benefit there of meeting more frequently and being able to cover broader subjects in a more timely fashion. In particular, that group last year, we crafted language related to the pandemic and forestry being an essential function and something that should be allowed to continue as a lot of lockdowns were going into place, and also the ability to share that language across our state society. So folks, if forestry wasn't considered essential in a given state, then we had language to support that. I know several folks used that related to moving in that direction in their particular state. So that was exciting and a busy time for us. In addition, I would say that for us as SAF, as many of you know, we have our National Committee on Forest Policy. Has been around for a very long time, does great work related to our national position statements in particular. And a lot of that work has been focused on, reviewing and updating our old position statements, and there are some key ones that we have. But what's been exciting the last few years is that that group has been a bit more proactive and looking for new areas or more specific areas of interest that we should have national positions on. So if you go to our website, you'll see some new national positions related to recreation, related, impacts to forest management or water resources. I think we just updated the forest roads position statement as well. So looking at where there's some new areas that really we should have at least a foundational piece of knowledge to support our members and support policymakers related to where SAF stands as a group of forestry and natural resource professionals on these issues. So that's been something that's been exciting for me to just see that group become a bit more proactive and look at some different opportunities. The other piece where I would say that we've been really active actually over the last year has been hiring, really looking at how we're structured as an organization from a staff perspective and how we're able to deliver, our programs and deliver on our mission as SAF. And so we brought on several folks in the past year. A lot of them are learning about SAF and forestry, but bring a lot of really good energy and great backgrounds related to managing associations and communicating around important issues that has been a real lift to us as a national staff and how they approach some of their work. So really excited about what that team's building with me and a great group of folks and looking at how we can just improve the programs that we have and better deliver on those. That was something that was fairly loud and clear when I started, is that we were having some challenges on some of our programs, so we're able to shore some of those up. So I've been excited about that. And just overall looking at how we can improve. Organizationally, we do a lot as an organization, and we're excited to continue that and make things better along the way. And how we can engage again, our broader membership and support our partners and do just really the important work that we all want to do, based around scientific management of forests. So it's been quite the interesting and steep learning curve in my first couple of years, but I've enjoyed it and learned a lot. I remember a couple of years ago when I was able to see many of you in person there in Anchorage, and look forward to when we can do that again. It was my first trip to Alaska, so it was quite the experience, and definitely got a real kick out of it and learned a lot while I was there. So that's kind of just a quick, in a nutshell, just a few comments, and I really want a chance if folks have questions or thoughts that they'd like to share. I want to give a little bit of time for that before you jump into the full program, if that's all right.
Yes, we definitely have time. And once again, you got so much going on. Really, thank you for taking the time out to be with us today. It's kind of hard to moderate questions on a Zoom meeting. I guess.
Folks can write them in the chat, or I think there's on the reactions, you can raise your hand. So there's also that option.
Or speak up.
Yes, Mr. Baker, this is Jim Tuttle with the Dixon Entrance chapter. My question is simply, what's that beautiful, colorful slab of wood behind you?
My pleasure. So it's actually pretty entertaining. A lot of folks are like, is that a Zoom background? I'm like, actually, no. So you can reach back and touch it.
Wow.
That is actually an 8-foot tree cookie. It's a redwood tree cookie from California. And the story behind that is that back when we purchased the Pinchot building, I believe in the mid to late 70s, the California chapter of SAF and also the California Division of Forestry had a large redwood that fell over in one of the state forests, and they cut a tree round out of it and shipped it across the country to be showcased in our headquarters to represent the West Coast. And so I had to be a little creative as we were going through the process of selling the old building and finding a new space, but was able to figure out, especially when I say creative financially, to transport this tree cookie from Bethesda to an office building in downtown DC. So pretty sure we have the only suite in any building in downtown DC that has a 800-pound tree cookie in it. So I'm very proud of that fact. And
Very nice, very nice.
tried to find other walls, but it's ironically, it fits in my office. So that's where it ended up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Baker, this is Charlie Sink from the Cook Inlet chapter.
How you doing, Charlie?
Yeah, my question is about the debate on recruitment of new members. And we had a debate a few years ago about maybe opening it up to natural resource professionals. And I kind of like to hear an update on the thinking that's going on about that on the nationwide level.
Sure thing. So it's interesting that you bring that up, and I wonder how many debates there have been on that particular subject, because in all actuality, if you look at our bylaws, it actually says forestry and natural resource professionals. So in essence, that debate has come to a close, but unfortunately, we just haven't talked about it much. So that is something that, recruitment of members is definitely a key piece and of what Gene would like to accomplish, and also Chris, both Chris's, I think, I've heard talk about recruitment of new members. And so that's something that we're working on as far as some campaign information and language for all of our members. But it's going to be clarifying a lot of those parts and pieces for us as an organization, because I don't know necessarily why they haven't been communicated, but they haven't been, or not widely. And so looking forward to just providing clarity around that. And we have a lot of folks who represent other natural resource management areas, that are members and highly active in SAF. And I think bring a lot to us as an organization, as a profession. As we all know, we may spend a lot of time out in the woods and have to know a little bit about everything, but at the same time, we also look to other specialists to help inform some of the things that we write in a silvicultural prescription, say. So I think there's definitely an opportunity there. It's not like we're going to raid the Wildlife Society of all their biologists, but I think there's definitely an interest in what we do and how that's structured and what opportunities there are for folks who represent the broader span of natural resource management to be able to engage and be a part of SAF.
Okay, so I guess I got an answer, but it hasn't been decided yet to whether to make natural resource capable people of being members, full members.
Yes, that was decided several years ago. I'm not quite sure. I haven't looked back at historical board minutes, but that decision, was made and voted on because it's represented in our bylaws.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've been out of the loop, obviously, so I just needed to know. Thank you.
Happy to share. No problem at all. Thanks for the question. I see Ken has his hand up.
Yes, this is kind of a follow-up on several questions. One that Charlie just asked, it'll fit in here somehow. But I was wondering mainly about the Sacramento meeting and whether there is some thought into making at least part of it virtual, because I think it will provide or can provide an opportunity for a lot of folks to attend that couldn't otherwise fly off to Sacramento, and that might help with our membership.
Sure thing. Great question, Ken. There are not just some thoughts, there are a lot of thoughts around our Sacramento convention this year. It's a complicated question for us to figure out and try to best deliver on the national convention given the pandemic. Last year was a bit of a unique situation as we were having various conversations around in-person or virtual and what kind of our risk profile was as an organization. The Providence Convention Center made that decision for us by saying they were going to be, converted into a COVID recovery hospital. So it just wasn't an option. We still have the choice on if we were going to have a virtual meeting or just have no meeting, like many associations and forestry associations in particular decided not to do. But we went forward and we had what I feel like was a great virtual meeting last year. So we're looking at all those parts and pieces. related to Sacramento this year and what opportunities we have and how to best deliver that convention opportunity to our membership. And so, thanks for the thoughts and know that I'll be actually meeting with some folks later this week, but we've been in regular contact with the Convention Bureau there, understanding what California is doing and what their timeframes look like, as well as we sent out a survey to our members to really get a feel of, how folks would like to engage, both from a standpoint of willingness and also in some cases financially if they can or can't, participate in an in-person event. So a lot of information to take in and develop some thoughts and recommendations and decisions. But that's a long-winded way of saying yes. But thanks for bringing that up.
I see another hand up, Mitch.
Yep, we've got Mitch over there.
Hi,
Good to
Terry.
see you again, Mitch.
Hi, Terry. Nice to see you back, almost back here in Alaska. Virtual is almost there. Those are one of the things about COVID. And my question is about COVID. And we got COVID burnout, and thank God we don't have to wear masks when we're working around trees. But can you give us 3 positive things that have come out of the COVID era we're in that are going to be permanently retained by SAF?
That's an interesting question. So I know of at least 1 or 2 come to mind immediately. So, and it's interesting because I'll say that one we started prior to COVID. So, we launched our online learning platform ForestEd in January of 2019. And I think that was one of those opportunities that really we had a year's worth of experience and how we were doing things and opportunities and partners we were working with to bring content to ForestEd. And so I think that was really, for us, it was just a great opportunity. And of course, we're going to continue that and look at how we grow that platform because there's the ability to just offer things to such a broader audience. And so we continue to have, really informative conversations with various organizations and partners on what we could offer. And I think that's one of the major things that came out of last year was kind of almost a reinforcing and probably a pushing a little bit more than previously of when we launched it around folks engaging in ForestEd. I think that another particular takeaway from me from the pandemic obviously relates a little bit to Ken's question around the convention. We've all learned a lot about virtual meetings in the past year. And of course, having a virtual convention meets a lot of different needs. And so for us to really weigh that and look at what that looks like for us as an organization. The nuance of what we call a hybrid meeting versus a virtual meeting versus an in-person meeting, there's several things to consider there. And so we're definitely going to keep that in mind and look at what opportunities are around. Speaking of ForestEd, one of the things that we started last year and we're going to do this year and definitely continue in the future was actually having working group webinars. So for years, the working groups, their engagement was focused around convention and the ability for a core group to meet up in person and have dialogue around various subject matter areas that folks were interested in or working in. And I think that, of course, we just haven't, in our own ways, we haven't kept up with the times as folks engage and discuss various topics, via social media platforms and other ways. And so 2 things that came out of that was a chance to have working group webinars where working groups actually, meet part of that mission in charge of not only engaging in these conversations, but disseminating that information to the broader membership. We're also having conversations with possible collaborative platforms that we could have where folks could actually engage online more frequently than sending things via email and or engaging in an outside platform, like a LinkedIn group or something of that nature. So more to come on that, but we're excited about that opportunity and having that be something that we do into the future. Try to think if there's a third. I think that, we definitely learned that there's quite a bit of our business model that can be done virtually. So, that gives us some flexibility when we look at hiring into the future. So that's good to know and something to consider. but I also believe there's a benefit of having a core in the headquarters. So we continue to look at things in that way. And but I think, you know, we've learned a lot. We've grown a lot. Definitely had some hard lessons, but at the same time been able to move some things forward. So those are at least the top three, 2 to 3 in my head right now, Mitch. And I'll keep thinking about that, because there's obviously been a lot more lessons learned than what I just shared. But it's been a good year for us, despite various challenges.
All right. Well, thank you, Kerry. I was keeping count and I thought you got 4. So I definitely.
I will take the win.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, and thanks, Mitch, for that question. It's always nice to put a positive spin on things. Any other questions for Terry? Going
There's one.
once.
There's
Oh.
one in the chat, Gary, there
Oh,
from
let me see.
Jeremy Dowse.
Oh, okay.
Oh boy, Jeremy, tossing a grenade in there. Thank you for that. All right, the CF program. No, it's actually a great question. So a couple of things to speak to related to the CF program. One is that over the course of the latter part of 2019 and early 2020, we had we conducted an assessment, a review of the CF program. And that was several members, board members, and some other folks that were engaged in that, the certification review board. And we conducted a member survey and learned a lot around where we had some challenges with the Certified Forester program, and also a bit more of the history of how things were initiated and what some of the initial thoughts were around the Certified Forester program when it was initiated. So with all that, some of the key things that we've learned, we've been able to move out on. In particular, one was bringing on a second staff person to support Naomi in the CF program. So this was our big year for those of you who've been around for a little while. We had the time frame where we basically grandfathered a lot of folks into the CF program who applied and they didn't have to take the test. So that was our biggest group. And so it's on a 3-year cycle. So a lot of folks came up over the course of last year and into this year. And so having that second person, Melissa Lowy, has been, you know, a huge help, and she's done a phenomenal job. So part of that is just that more efficient, more frequent, improved response time and settling of issues and answering questions, and helping folks, you know, just go through the process of renewals, let alone anything else. But with that, you know, there's various things that we've learned from that assessment. One was just the ability to, you know, communicate better and how we can do that with our certified foresters and with our members. So we've been working on various strategies to do that. Some of it's related to opportunities for CFE. So we've been working through that as well with some of these different efforts we've taken on the past year or so. I think some of the higher level pieces that we'll be looking at going forward in the future will be the possibility of our credential being accredited by a third party. So there's a couple of different international actually associations that accredit certifications or credentials. So we'll be looking at that to bring a little bit more credibility to the Certified Forester program. And I think part of it is also the importance of that, to add it to that communication piece internally. It's also externally. Awareness of the CF program and relevancy of the CF program, I think, are key pieces, because just from sending out that survey, we had several people who responded they didn't know that the CF program existed. And we've seen a significant uptick in the number of applications to be a certified forester or a conditional certified forester just within a year of sending that survey out. So, and that's the only thing that we did differently. So, I mean, we can attribute that survey just raised people's awareness of the opportunity. I think we also have some unique opportunities with the CF program, as you know, we see more and more organizations get into you know, carbon markets and things of that nature. And so having a credential associated with you that showcases your commitment to continuing education and testing to showcase your level of intellect and understanding of forest systems is going to become more and more relevant as we move forward with having, you know, the Microsofts and the Googles and the Amazon saying we're going to be carbon neutral or carbon negative in the next 20 to 30 years. Those organizations want someone who holds a credential, working in those, working in that market, signing off on forest management practices and writing plans. So I think there's also some opportunity for us as we move forward, in building up and building out the program and showcasing the value. So I hope that answers your question, Jeremy. I think we're in a really good spot to really improve the CF program. I think we have improved it significantly, and also there's opportunity going forward for us to make it even more of a showcase piece of being involved in SAF.
Well,
and Chris makes a great point in the chat, just so folks are aware. One of the pieces, I'm not sure how much this will stay. I'm sure there'll be some continuation of for Mitch's question. Virtual meetings have allowed for more of the, myself and officers to engage in state society meetings, as well as some local chapter meetings that have been virtual. As folks have let us know, if we have time, we're just like, hey, we'll hop in and say hello and just have an opportunity to engage and hear from, a broader span of our membership. So that's a great opportunity as well that has kind of been born out of the pandemic and the challenges, but the opportunities.
Mr. Baker, I'd like to catch up on. I'm the guy that's been in the backwoods, so to speak, behind a desk, actually. Our new digs in DC, could you tell us about it? I've been kind of out of the loop on the SAF for a little while because of other things I'm doing.
So yes, so we made the mansion was sold in April of 2020, and we were able to sign a lease, I believe it was June, July, maybe somewhere around there of 2020, and worked through the process of relocating really throughout the remainder of the year. In that sense, I would not recommend moving during a pandemic, both personally and definitely not professionally. It was quite the experience of trying to go through 50 plus years worth of documents, and we made it through quite a bit. And some of we just going to put that in storage and have to figure it out a little bit later. But our new location, we're in downtown. We're on K Street, so 2121K is the address of the new building. We're in Suite 315. So part of the appeal of moving to this space was proximity, and by proximity, we're in the same building as SFI. We are within a couple of blocks of the American Forest Foundation, similarly with American Forests and the American Forest and Paper Association. So we're easily accessible, and that was one of the things that really stood out to me when I started this position and had several partners, as well as some of our own members who were attending meetings here in DC. They were like, we can't come out to the building. We just can't lose 2 hours of our day just traveling back and forth. And so the opportunity for us to come into DC and be more accessible so that we can engage partners, but also our own members and other leaders in the forestry sector who may be in DC for a day or two because they sit on another organization's board, because they're here for field visits and engaging their representatives. They can stop by and share what's going on with them, what's going on in the moment, what they just spoke about, as well as I'll be able to share with them updates of what's going on with SAF at that moment. So just that opportunity to be more so part of the conversation than we had been, simply because it was such a distance to get to us for folks who are engaged in efforts here in the Capitol, was part of why we moved here. The group NAFRP, the National Association of University Forestry Programs, Forest Resource Programs. They actually are only a couple blocks when they come to DC for their board meetings and their executive committee meetings. They're a couple blocks away from us as well. So we're really in a great spot to engage a broad group of partners on a regular basis, and be a value add and have them be a value add to us. So that's a big part of why why I chose or recommend to the board that we move to this particular location.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
Okay.
All right, Ed, I I think I'm throwing it back to you, but I'll be able to stay on for quite some time, and happy to answer questions in the chat. And folks can always reach out to me via email if you've got other questions or thoughts. And again, just thanks to everybody for engaging in this meeting today and being engaged SAF members. It's great to see all of you. And again, as many of us, looking forward to being back in Alaska sometime in the near future to explore more of the state and learn more about the forest. So thanks, everyone.
Hey, thanks again, Terry. And we are planning to have our next annual meeting a year from now in Fairbanks. So think about that. You too, Gene. Gene's saying it's too cold up there.
As long as you can get Gene a fishing trip, you might get him up.
How about bow hunting for moose, but not minus 29 degrees. I'm not coming. That's what it was yesterday, right, Chris Mesh?
Yeah, Gene, it was actually Saturday evening. We set a new all-time record for cold, and it was 29 here in town. But today it's, I think, almost 50 at the house. So it's over a 70-degree swing in just a few days' time. So it'll be nice when you get up here, Gene. Promise.
We can guarantee that.
Well, Ed, just notice what he just said. He said 29, assuming I knew that was above Fahrenheit. He's talking about below.
Yeah. It was unusual, but does happen.
All right. Well, very good. I appreciate all the questions and your time with us, Terry. And yeah, like Terry said, if you got some more questions, you can go to the chat and talk in there. Now we are going to continue on our traverse of Alaskan forestry as we head northward to the Sitka chapter today. And today our host is Patrick Hewer, past chair of the Sitka chapter. So Patrick, I will turn the meeting over to you.
All right. Well, thanks, Ed, and thanks, Terry. Especially glad to see Terry on today, and appreciate him taking the time to talk to us today. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here. Now I'd like to just welcome everyone to Sitka virtually. I'm going to share my screen here for just a minute. I've got a map. It'll kind of, let's see here if it'll work. Just for maybe a few folks on that aren't from Alaska. And so it'll kind of give folks an idea of where Sitka is in relation to the vast state of Alaska. We're down there on the panhandle there. We're about 85 miles west of Juneau. Sitka is about 8,500 people located on Baranof Island. And we're surrounded by the Tongass National Forest. The picture in the upper left of my screen there is pretty much the town of Sitka. You can see the runway out there, kind of off the main part of town, and that's a pretty good view of Sitka, other than the residential area, which backs up against the mountains there on shore. But just a little bit of an interesting fact about Sitka: the forest at the base of Mount Verstovia here in Sitka represents what likely I think is the oldest industrial clear cut in Alaska. And perhaps maybe in North America. The Russians occupying Sitka prior to statehood harvested this site in about 1860, shortly before the transfer to the US. And they produced charcoal for use in their foundries for mainly building ships by slowly burning wood on the site. And there's charcoal pits up and down the hillside that can still be found today if you look closely where they did that. And that Verstovia forest today kind of illustrates the structure and dynamics of a maturing 160-year-old even-age spruce hemlock forest. Sitka is also the location of one of the two former pulp mills that Sheila mentioned, or maybe Tessa yesterday in their presentation. The Alaska Pulp Corporation was located here in Sitka from 1959 to 1993. In 93, the mill closed. But in that time frame from about 1959 through about 1993, they harvested a considerable amount of timber around the Sitka and Hoona areas here. There's about 53,000 acres of young growth. We talked a little bit about young growth yesterday with Sheila. There's about 53,000 acres of young growth here around Sitka on the Sitka district of the Tongass, and about another 18,000 acres of young growth over on Chichikov Island near Hoona. There's a small mill over in Hoona, Icy Straits Lumber. They process about 2 to 5 million a year. Still, that's probably the closest active mill to Sitka, but it's still a little ways away on a different island. And then presently, the forest products industry in Sitka represents a small proportion of the local economy, and primarily in the form of niche markets. Commercial fishing, tourism, healthcare, and state and federal governments are currently the main economic sectors in Sitka. Sitka is home to one of 2 Coast Guard air stations in Alaska, the other one on Kodiak Island, and one of 10 Tongass National Forest Ranger districts is here in Sitka. As far as the Sitka chapter goes, we're a chapter of about 6 members. And interestingly enough, we were talking about non-forestry members being members of SAF. 2 of our members are actually non-forestry professions. Our chapter chair right now, Greg Dunn, is a wildlife biologist, and one of our other members is a fish bio and the district ranger here for the local Forest Service district office. Our chapter activities are focused primarily on working with the local schools on forestry and natural resource management education. And we also work with the local Forest Service office here on forest management issues in and around the local community. So that's kind of a brief overview of the Sitka chapter and a little bit about Sitka. And without too much further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Alan Brackley here in just a minute. He's our presenter for today. Alan is one of our Sitka chapter members, and just recently a 50-year SAF member. So he's been a member of SAF for a long time. And Alan is the title of his presentation today is Facts and Fiction about the Dawn Redwood. And so we're going to talk a little bit about redwoods today, and this particular species of redwood that's growing here in Sitka. A little bit different theme from yesterday, but a little bit about Alan. Prior to his retirement, Alan Brackley was the team leader of the Alaska Wood Research and Development Center with the U.S. Forest Service here in Sitka, and he also worked as the director of the University of Alaska Fairbanks CSREES Forest Products Program in Sitka prior to coming to the Forest Service. And he's been retired here a couple of years, about a year now, I think. He'll probably correct us if I'm wrong. But anyway, without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Alan Brackley, and he's gonna start his presentation. So Alan, I guess I'll turn it over to you. Let me stop sharing my screen here. I kind of new to this. All right, so yeah, Alan, if you can go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, share screen. Am I there?
You're there. Yep, we can see it. So it's all yours.
The Dawn Redwood is is an interesting tree that wasn't even recognized until shortly after the Second World War. And we have the distinction in Sitka of having the furthest north surviving dawn redwood tree in the world. And it's kind of an interesting story that has many facets. I'd like to talk about the discovery of the tree in China and Japan, the trees in Sitka. There's a lot of myths associated about the tree. I'd like to talk about some of the myths. And in the United States, there were two scientists that were involved in bringing the dawn redwood seeds from China to North America. And it turned into a rather interesting situation where you had two scientists that their view of what they did with the redwood tree is vastly different. The facts: in 1941, a Japanese scientist using fossils identified the fact that the tree existed and it was unique. And during the Second World War in 1943, the tree was actually a sample of the tree was located living in China. In 1945-46, additional samples were found, and two scientists in China, C. Wang and C.J. Hushu, identified that tree as a living example of what was thought to be a fossil. And the reality of the situation when it comes to discovering the tree, finding the tree, naming it, nobody in the United States had anything to do with it. It was all scientists in Japan and China. The plot kind of thickens, however, when efforts were made to get seeds from the species to the United States and distribute the seeds so that they could be grown in greenhouses and the environment throughout the United States, throughout the world. And some interesting personalities and some interesting events. But, oops. This is the lone surviving tree in Sitka. It's located on the north end of Japonski Island. And very poor form. I think it may be attributed to, and I think it's generally agreed to, the fact that it's in a very, very exposed position right on the water at the north end of the island. But this is the only surviving tree in Sitka that was grown from seed. SAF has maintained a sign, and there's a couple little things on the sign that the date of discovery is 1944, and I guess that's as good a year as any, but actually the confirmation of a living tree of a unique species took place in 1945. It all says collected there in 1948. It wasn't collected in 1948, it was collected in 1946. Whoops. The Society of American Foresters were involved in the planting of trees in Alaska from the start. But this history of the Sitka trees really kind of dates to 1988. And sometime prior to 1988, cuttings were taken from the original tree, and a number of foresters that lived in Sitka, the cuttings were taken to the Petersburg nursery and they were vegetatively reproduced. and there was a number of trees, 6 trees from vegetative propagation that came to Sitka. And some of the names involved Jim Russell, Fred Goslin was John Sherrod, so that these were some people of long standing involved in forestry with the Forest Service in Sitka. I think if you want to look at some definitive information in the facts, there's an article by Harris in 1973 in the Journal of Forestry. There's a huge 100-page article by Fulling in 1974. And they basically review an awful lot of the history of what happened with Dawn Redwood when it came to America. There's some elements of the history and the story that never became complete until a Chinese scientist by the name of Ma, I won't even attempt to pronounce his first name, went to China in 2002 and went through the records and came up with some information relative to what actually happened with the seeds as they left China. When you look at the redwoods vegetative propagation, there's 3 surviving, and each of them has a sign which was put in place by the Society of American Foresters. The first one is at the old hospital building in a very sheltered position, and it has been by far the most successful. In the future, we've got to kind of watch what's going on. The Sitka Hospital is in the massive set of change where all our medical services, except some old age situations, are being transferred to Mount Edgecombe across the bay and Japonski. So there may come a point where this tree has to be moved. The second tree is at the Pioneer Home on Lincoln Street, and the lighter green tree, and you can see classic example of phototropism as the tree has grown outward to the south and responded to the sunlight. The tree is quite visible, and all you have to do is walk up and down Lincoln Street, and that one's visible. The third surviving tree was originally in front of the Centennial Building. And a few years ago, they rebuilt the front of the Centennial Building, and the city moved the tree to a position south of the tennis courts at Crescent Harbor or Lincoln Street, which is the main street through Sitka. This tree, considering the fact, I think this was either the second or third move that this tree has made over its lifetime since 1988. Some of the myths that are floating around, and I might say, where did these myths come from? Well, that's part of the story that will follow, but the myths themselves are kind of interesting and fascinating. On the screen, I've shown a copy of a publication that was written by a woman by the name of Jensen that lived at the Pioneer Home for a number of years. And she repeated one of the commonly held myths. And the myth appeared in the Sitka Sentinel newspaper and in a number of newspapers up and down the West Coast. And they have various forms, but in simplicity, American flyer was shot down during World War II, found living dawn redwoods in a province in China. And he recognized what he had, which is impossible prior to 1945, but that's what the myth says. And he carried these seeds back to the United States. Well, it's kind of an interesting myth. If you start looking at dates and what happened, the thing's false, but yet you can't believe the number of people, especially on the West Coast, that been exposed to this, and that was their explanation for where it was there. I guess when we look at the myth and we move, you get to the point where you have to introduce some people. And the two primary scientists in the United States that were involved with dawn redwood and seeds was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ralph Cheney, and from 1931 to 56, professor of paleontology, curator of the Museum of Paleontology at the University of California, Berkeley. Now, in later years, he served as president of Save the Redwood League for 10 years. The second person that is involved was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Elmer Merrill. He was director of the Arnold Arboretum at Harvard University in Peabody, Mass, and the Arnold professor, and he served from 1935 to his death in 1956. So these two people had contrasting views of their position with respect to what they accomplished with dawn redwood. I've got to go to a third person because I think a lot of the myth and a lot of the false information about the thing came from a guy named Dr. Milton Silverman. He was the science editor for the San Francisco Chronicle. Now, he had a doctorate degree in pharmacology, and he won a lot of journalistic awards. He wrote a major report that publicly indicted the international marketing practices of major pharmaceutical firms back in the days of the Eisenhower administration. That was quite thought-provoking. But quoting a quote from something written after his death, I can't. Ralph Cheney, UC paleontologist for an adventurous expedition that led in 1948 to one of the most remote parts of China, where they discovered a family of trees long thought to exist. Cheney and Mr. Silverman brought back thousands of seedlings, which had been planted. And as a science editor for the San Francisco Chronicle, you might say that he took journalistic license, but remember, in newspapers, people write articles and the final word is always the editor. And in this case, there was a lot of journalistic license taken. It's also interesting, in 1990, he self-published a book. There's no date in it. And it represents kind of a travel log of his and Cheney's journey to China. I had a copy of it. it's now on file at the Arnold Arboretum in Peabody, Mass. The remaining issues relative to the history of the Dawn Redwood might be classed as activities of science and the application of scientific integrity as opposed to journalistic license. And when you look at the whole business of being a scientist and reporting data, quality data, credited other regions, honestly, clearly, objective, thoroughly, accurately, without bias, reviewed by peers, it's kind of interesting that a journalist and the concept of integrity says they should be using almost the same criteria for integrity. But what happens in the newspaper business, the objective is to sell papers. Papers often have political bias. My God, you mean to say the media is biased? They're subject to the whims of the editors. And many times the writers are not familiar with the subject matter. When you look at events in the United States after the notification of Cheney and Merrill of the discovery of the thing, both Cheney and Merrill, who at one time worked together, and the other interesting thing about both Cheney and Merrill, the students that identified the tree in China had been educated at Berkeley and Harvard. And Harvard in particular educated foreign students from all over the world. And then they went back to the countries they lived in. And they acted kind of as an extension of the Arnold Arboretum, supplying samples of plants and other things, so that it was a planned deal and the people in China knew both of them. But Cheney 3 times requested seeds and he donated $25. Merrill actually saved $250. Now, this doesn't sound like an amount, but when you look at Japan after the Second War and inflations, this amounted to millions of yen and quite an amount of money. But yet, $250 from Harvard, $25 from Cheney, and it appears perhaps that it was $25 out of his own pocket. The grant was received in China, and it allowed the collection in late 1946 of 2 kilograms of seed. I think I got the date wrong on that one. But anyway, Cheney expressed an interest to take a trip to China to view the living trees and start to solicit support. And he started to solicit support for the trip. And Merrill advised him about it because the time that he made the trip was early in the year. And of course, Metasequoia Dawn Redwood is a deciduous softwood, so that in the spring of the year, you're looking at a tree without foliage and there's no chance of collecting any material as far as thing. Cheney received funds to pay for the trip from the Save the Redwoods League and from the San Francisco Chronicle. Merrill disapproved of the trip, and Cheney and Dr. Milton Silverman, the science editor for the Contra, departed for China in late 1948 and returned 4 weeks later. Now, for many years, Merrill and others maintained that Cheney brought back no seed from China or an extremely limited amount, And according to the data that's available, Cheney returned with 4 seedlings. And it's interesting that one of the reports said he returned with thousands of seedlings, which is just another example of what happened. In 2002, when the records in China were reviewed, Ma found notes that indicated, in actuality, Cheney and Silverman left China with a considerable amount of seed, perhaps as much as 1 kilogram, and 4 seedlings. And the people in China asked Cheney to give some of these seeds to Merrill. And as instructed, some of these seeds went to Harvard. However, Cheney, given the support from the Save the Redwood League, considered the remaining seeds as property, or he gifted them to the Save the Redwood Leagues. And he never fully disclosed just exactly what happened, but the seeds that he brought back, which was a considerable number, were kind of, it was an unknown thing, and it kind of a fascinating thing that what happened. All of the seeds that went to Merrill and Harvard almost immediately upon receipt were repackaged and distributed to organizations throughout the world. And one of the questions I had, where did the seeds for the Sitka trees come from? And the Harris article in 1972, Harris was a research scientist for Pacific Northwest, states that they came from Cheney and Save the Redwood League. And where the seeds were started was never disclosed, but it's one of the little interesting quirks about this whole business that they're there, but the seeds did not come from Harvard. There's no question they were part of the ones that Cheney brought back that were never accounted for. I guess it's interesting to look at, sometimes the measure of a man is when he dies in his obituary. And I kind of extracted the obituary of Cheney on March 7th, 1971 from the New York Times. And I put in red what was said about his obituary. He was one of the discoverers in China of dawn redwoods, which he later introduced into the United States. And then you turn around and you look at Elmer Merrill's best remembered having distributed several bushels or at least 1 kilogram of Metasequoia seeds early in February of 1958. From the point of view of science, it's a terrible, terrible thing when you go back to the beginning slide and you look at the people that named the species. When you look at the fact that Cheney's trip with Silverman to China, they ended up where they were because Chinese foresters and people recommended that it's a place they should look. And he had Chinese guides all the way. I think it's a great injustice to a lot of people to see a man claimed to be the discoverer of something. He was a discoverer. Why the hell wasn't his name as part of the scientific name? And it wasn't. And I look at that, it's just tragedy. There's also another little quirk about the fact that the obituary said that in 1925, he went to China. I guess that kind of concludes the story and a little bit of the history. There's been a tremendous amount of articles published concerning Cheney and Merrill. And there were several times that Merrill was very, very upset. The San Francisco Chronicle and the Save the Redwood League sponsored a number of talks by Cheney. And when the talks were announced in the San Francisco Chronicle, every single one of them, he was one of the discoverers in China of Dawn Redwood. And that's patently false. But yet, even when Merrill complained, Cheney never did anything to acknowledge that that was incorrect. He wasn't the discoverer. But yet, when it comes to the day that their obituaries were published, that's what you see. If I can get out of this thing now, stop share. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, so thanks, Alan. Yeah, if I guess if there's any questions or comments for Alan, we've got a little bit of time here yet. Either raise your hand, put them in the chat, or just speak up. Yeah, go ahead, Ken Winterberger. Looks like you've got your hand up.
I just wanted to confirm that, I mean, it sounds like there's 4 trees, metasequoia trees, that have been planted around Sitka. One maybe from, one is considerably older than the other 3. You're muted, Alan.
Hey, Alan, you're on mute. Let me see if I can unmute him.
Okay, I got it. Here in Sitka, there are 4 surviving trees. The first one is from seed on Japonski Island. Very poor form, perhaps because of the exposed condition of where it was planted. The other 3 surviving trees are all vegetative propagation of that tree, one being located at the Sitka Hospital, one on Lincoln Street at the Pioneer Home, and the third one down at Crescent Harbor, south of the tennis court. Now, originally, I think there were 6 trees planted by vegetative propagation, and 3 of them survived. One of them was down to Sheldon Jackson. It got run over by a lawnmower, apparently. And the originally from seed, I think originally they planted in Sitka seedlings from seed of half a dozen trees, but only one of them survived.
Do you have any idea where the seed was actually propagated, or
The
is
seed
that
was
kind of-
started in the greenhouse. It was started and there were seedlings. But the vegetative propagation took place down in Petersburg when the Forest Service had the nursery down there, and they were rooted, and then they came to Sitka.
Yeah, the original tree over on Japonski Island, that came from seeds from that collection in China that Alan mentioned. And I don't know if we know who actually grew the seedlings, but about 50 of them were sent to Alaska and were planted in different locations. And the one in Sitka is the only surviving of all the ones that Alaska received. Yeah.
The interesting thing about the seed, when you look at Harris's article, he comes right out and said that they came from Cheney and the trees were part of a project sponsored by Save the Redwood League. Well, how did the Save the Redwood League become owner of seeds? I know, looking at the story, I think I know what happened, where they paid for Cheney's trip and Silverman's trip to China. For some reason, Cheney felt that he was obligated to give the seeds to them. There was a lot of seeds. There was a few years that if you joined the Redwood League, they gave you a Dawn Redwood seedling, I discovered, and looking some other things. So you had two people, one who tried to distribute the seeds to the world, and one that he did supply the seedlings that were planted in Alaska. I'm going to guess they were started in a greenhouse down in Berkeley, but I don't know for sure. Kind of an interesting situation. Two men of science.
Alan, we've got a question in the chat. I know the seeds here, or the trees here, aren't producing cones or seed yet. I suspect they will at some point. I'm not sure what year or how old redwoods need to be before they would start producing seed. Do you know?
I expect that they should start producing seeds, but remember they have male and female cones. We actually have 4 trees and they're all genetically the same stock. I got a lot of questions. We need a geneticist to answer them. But it is an interesting thing that they have a male cone and a female cone, and the production of seeds and the whole process where we've got one tree. Does the same tree produce both male and female in this case?
Good question. Andrew's got a question here. Alan, how long did it take you to track down this material, and where did you find the source material?
When I moved to Sitka, I joined the SAF. And in the first or second year I was here, I got introduced to it. And I was kind of curious about the thing, especially with the myths and everything else. I wanted to know what the hell's going on here, you know? Wonderful story, but I started digging into it and I discovered that the controversy between Cheney and Merrill was something that upset a lot of people in the scientific world of the time. So I kept digging and I kept digging. And there's one article that was published after Merrill's death that was an attempt to kind of research the record and find out what happened. And that was a 100-page article. The problem was that was written here in the United States. And a lot of the important stuff about this one is in records in China. And of course, with China after World War II and the Chinese Revolution and a lot of other things, it's only within the past 15 years, say, that China has become open and people could go there. Well, this guy Ma was born in China, educated in China, but he worked for a number of years in the United States. And after being in the United States 5 years and kind of getting exposed to it, he went back to China and checked the records in China. And nobody realized up until that point that Cheney and Silverman returned with the volumes of seed that they did. Various people have estimated, but he perhaps returned with up to a kilogram of seeds, which is a lot of seeds. He did send part of them to Merrill, but just exactly how much and the distribution of it, until 2002, there was nothing from the records in China, but at that point, it became very, very clear that there was another point of fact in the thing. And Ma published an article. Well, if you start tracing all of this stuff, let me tell you, if you go to the article by Marr, and the other one, I was trying to think who the person was on Mike.
We've got about 10 minutes left, Alan, here. I'm just, I've got one other question here, maybe while you're looking at that. From Nathan, has anyone considered doing genetic tests to determine where the trees came from? And Nathan, I can say that I don't believe we have, but that's a good question. That might be something worth looking into. And but I'm not aware of that. We really hadn't thought about that, I don't think. At least I hadn't.
Real long article about this whole thing was written by Fulling in 1974. It appears in the Botanical Review, and there is 25 or 30 pages of references in that. So that if you get interested in this, find the Fulling article and then go to the article that was written later by Ma in 2002. And that gives you a pretty much complete picture. On the history of that. Now, on the other issue about seeds, I think it's pretty certain where the seeds came from.
All right, looks like Beth shared. Oh, go ahead, Beth.
Oh, okay. I just shared a link to an article that was in the Daily News a couple years ago about a dawn redwood growing in Homer. And when I went to Google to find this article, I actually found a couple other ones too. So, and Ed Berg is mentioned in there, and then the fact that metasequoia used to grow here, 50 million years ago, and then disappeared from North America. But interesting article. And this is, a little bit more current update on that. It didn't say, I skimmed it again. It didn't say where
I thought the tree up there had died, but I may be
Well,
wrong.
Maybe there's a couple, like 3 or 4 of them there in Homer. Maybe it did die. I saw it last year when I was in Homer.
There's some pretty powerful scientists that are claiming Sitka's the place. I'll have to check that one out.
Just, yeah, for interest.
Is there anybody from Homer, the Homer area, that could, if there's a tree there, it'd be nice to get some pictures of it, and we'll relinquish the farthest north to Homer.
Mitch is probably the closest one.
Well, we can follow up with Mitch possibly and see if we can figure out if there are trees there and where they're located, maybe get some pictures. So
I am
All right.
I am here, by the way. So I was just trying to find my mute button. Yeah, that thanks, Beth, for sending that along. When Ed Berg brought that up And I think he's mentioned in that article, Beth, probably. I think it is.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so anyway, we have continually been getting calls, I have, about how do I get seedlings and will they grow here? And we even talked about possibly getting some seeds from you folks down in the southeast and growing them in the nursery at the
plant
research
material
station.
center. Yeah.
And yeah, the PNC, thank you, Beth. And the fellow who coordinates it, she says, sure, I'll grow them, just send me some seed. So I've been doing a little bit of research and I did find out that it grows very well by seed. It's a very prolific sprouter. And then somebody mentioned the genetics, and I think that was Nathan. And you know, as we were, I'll just add to Alan's great presentation. As we were monkeying around with this tree, it was also being planted in Europe. And that's an interesting thing. And in Europe, they were doing, I guess they did quite a few plantations, especially like in Denmark. And they found that the tree exhibited all kinds of genetic, not genetic, but physical differences. It fluted sometimes it didn't flute. It grew really fast. There's one in a park, in an arboretum in Denmark that grows, it's 125 feet tall now, and it grows 2 feet a year, and it's still going. So, and their intent was to grow their own redwood right substitute. So, but if anybody knows about how well it does, like in the Anchorage Bowl, I would appreciate it. I might just buy a handful of seeds and grow them in my greenhouse. Let them loose.
Distributed the seeds for these things all over the world, plus the Chinese themselves sent the seeds to a number of arboretums in Europe, so that today the main place that has got Dawn Redwood is in Ohio. I'm trying to think of the name of the arboretum there. That's the biggest collection in the United States. But at this point in time, you find them growing pretty much right around the globe in the northern hemisphere. I don't know if we tried to grow them in the southern hemisphere or not.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're coming up on 5 minutes before 1:30. There's no further questions. Maybe I'll turn it back to you, Ed, for kind of some closing remarks. And I guess thoughts for tomorrow, maybe.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Alan, for that interesting presentation. I didn't know there was all that history and mystery behind the tree. I felt like I was watching one of those investigative shows on TV. So thank you for that. Also want to thank Patrick for moderating today and organizing the day with Greg. And again, Terry, thank you for being here, traveling all this way to Alaska. We hope to see you in person next year, as I said. And tomorrow we will continue on our virtual traverse of Alaska. We will go a little bit north and a little bit east to Juneau, and the Juneau chapter will host the meeting tomorrow. So unless there are any last minute thoughts or questions for any of our speakers, we will adjourn for today and reconvene tomorrow at noon Alaska time.
And I will just add that if you want CFE credits, please share it in the chat, and we'll keep it open for another minute or two. So.
Yep, I was just about to remember to say that.
Okay.
I just looked up on Sheffield's seeds, and they sell the seeds. So if you want to buy the seeds, you can go to Sheffield's, and I put the link in the chat.
Is there any credence to the part of the story about American pilots crashing in China during World War II and finding this medicine center?
And finding what? What was the last you said?
That's That's the myth part of the, that's the myth part of the story. Jim is,
Thank you.
so that,
Yeah, the estimate is that of viable, there are 28 viable seeds per packet, and the packet costs $6.
Yeah, I threw a link to Burgess because I've seen it in their catalog for years. You can mail order seedlings for like $12.
well,
What's interesting too is that it is in the same family as our yellow cedar, which is wonderful.
that is interesting. I did not know that yet, so. All right, well, that's a good little tidbits of information on the Don Redwood showing up here. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, a good discussion, and yeah, it's interesting topic. It's like people are signing out. Don't forget to get your CFEs, and we'll see you tomorrow.